the law for loving your Hebrew Israelite enemies. The law for loving your Hebrew Israelite enemies. Our keynote scriptures are Exodus chapter 23, verse 4 through 5, and Matthew chapter 5, verse 43 through 44. They read as thus: And if thou meet thine enemy's ox or his ass going astray, thou shalt surely bring it back to him again. And if you see the donkey of him that hateth thee lying under his burden, and wouldest forbear to help him, thou shalt surely help with him. Matthew chapter 5, verse 43 through 44. You have heard that it hath been said, thou shalt love thy neighbor and hate thine enemy. But I say unto you, love your enemies, bless them that curse you, do good to them that hate you, and pray for them which despitefully use you and persecute you. Among Israelites, there are grudge matches that develop through the years, which challenge our obedience to the command in Leviticus chapter 19, verse 17 through 18, which says, thou shalt not hate thy brother in thine heart. Thou shalt in any wise rebuke thy neighbor and not suffer sin upon him. Thou shalt not avenge nor bear any grudge against the children of thy people, but thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. I am Yahweh. Notice in verse 18 of Leviticus chapter 19 is actually what our master Yeshua said is the second greatest commandment in Torah, which is this: but thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. Our master Yeshua taught this law of loving our neighbor in Mark chapter 12, and that it comes second to the greatest law, which is to love Yah with all our heart, as recorded in Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 5, which states, and thou shalt love Yah, the Elohim, with all thine heart, with all thy soul, with all thy might. In Mark 12:29 through 31, our master Yeshua states where it says, quote, and Yeshua answered him, the first of all the commandments is, hear, O Israel, Yah Elohim is one Yah. And thou shalt love Yah thy Elohim with all thy heart, with all thy soul, and with all thy mind, and with all thy strength. This is the first commandment. And the second is like, namely this: thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. There is none other commandment greater than these. Our master Yeshua likewise states in Matthew chapter 22, verse 37 through 40, where it says, Yeshua said unto him, thou shalt love Yah thy Elohim with all thy heart, and with all thy soul, and with all thy mind. This is the first and great commandment. And the second is like unto it: thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. On these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets. So the law of loving our Israelite enemies is based around the commandment in Leviticus, chapter 19, verse 17 through 18, again, which says, thou shalt not hate thy brother in thine heart. Thou shalt in any wise rebuke thy neighbor and not suffer or allow sin upon him. Thou shalt not avenge nor bear any grudge against the children of thy people, but thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. I am Yah. And so our master Yeshua is actually teaching us from Leviticus chapter 19, verse 17 through 18, not to bear a grudge of hatred towards Israelites who have done us wrong, when he teaches us in Matthew chapter 5, verse 44, to love our Israelite enemies, as stated, as he said in Matthew chapter 5, verse 44, But I say unto you, love your enemies, bless them that curse you, do good to them that hate you, and pray for them which despitefully use you and persecute you. Now keep in mind that the scope of Yahshua's teaching of loving your enemy in Matthew chapter 5 was spoken in context to Israelites towards other Israelites, because constantly he used the phrase throughout this chapter, you have heard. This phrase, you have heard, clearly shows that our teacher and master, Yahshua, is teaching the application of Torah law in Matthew 5 to Israelites exclusively in this chapter, and not to Gentiles in this chapter. Because Israelites alone, out of all nations, had received the law, and therefore our master could address Israelites with the phrase, you have heard. He couldn't have said that if it was to a Gentile audience. But to an Israelite audience, he could say, you have heard. And so he's giving this teaching to the Israelite people themselves in this passage, because he says, you have heard, because it was to us that Yah initially gave the Torah and not to any other nation. As stated in Psalm 147, verse 19 through 20, he showeth his word unto Yaakov, his statutes and his judgments unto Israel. He have not dealt so with any nation. And as for his judgments, they have not known them. Praise Yah. Also, as stated in Romans 2:1, it states, what advantage then have the Jew or the Hebrew? Or what profit is there of circumcision? Much every way, chiefly because that unto them were committed the oracles, that is, the revelation word of Elohim was revealed to the Israelites. And so Yahshua could say to them, you have heard. So all that he's teaching here about loving your enemies is spoken in the context of Israelites in relationship to other Israelites in this case. Also, in Romans chapter 9, verse 4, another witness that the information that he's teaching on loving your enemies is in this section in Matthew 5, he's applying it between Israelites, because he said, you have heard. Well, Romans chapter 9, verse 4 says, quote, who are Israelites, to whom pertaineth the adoption and the glory and the covenants and the giving of the law and the service of Elohim and the promises. So again, this teaching is only to the Israelites that he's speaking to in chapter 5 of Matthew, because at this point, they're the only ones who have been given this word, that have heard the Torah. So in his statement here in Matthew chapter 5, verse 44, he is again speaking exclusively about Israelites loving their Israelite enemies, and is not here talking about Israelites loving non-Israelite enemies, because he keeps using the phrase, you have heard. And based on the scriptures just cited, this means his teaching here is regarding Israelites loving their Israelite enemies. We shall address later in this lesson our master's teaching regarding love to foreigners. But in Matthew chapter 5, chapter 6, and chapter 7, the so-called Sermon on the Mount, this teaching the master does here is to Israelites exclusively. So in his teaching of Israelites to love their Israelite enemies, our master Yahshua here is not teaching something new or different than what is already taught in Torah, as was the case as we cited in Exodus chapter 23, verse 4 through 5, which states, if thou meet thine enemy's ox or his donkey going astray, thou shalt surely bring it back to him again. And if you see the donkey of him that hateth you lying under his burden, and wouldest forbear to help him, thou shalt surely help with him. Now, this law in Exodus 23, verse 4 through 5, regarding helping your enemy Israelites, livestock, such as an ox or a donkey. This is an outward action that is a sign of love towards your Israelite enemy. So in this case, love for your Israelite enemy is demonstrated by an action of love. It's got to be demonstrated by an action of love, not just because you say, I love you, man, you know, and yet there's still hate. And stated also in 1 John chapter 3, verse 17 through 24. It says, well, whoso hath this world's good, and see if his brother have need, and shutteth up his bowels of compassion from him, how dwelleth the love of Elohim in him? My little children, let us not love in word, neither in tongue, but in deed and in truth. And hereby we know that we are of the truth, and shall assure our hearts before him. And hereby we know that we are of the truth, and shall assure our hearts before him. For if our heart condemn us, Elohim is greater than our heart, and knoweth all things. Beloved, if our heart condemn us not, then we have confidence toward Elohim. And whatsoever we ask, we receive of him, because we keep his commandments and do those things that are pleasing in his sight. And this is his commandment, that we should believe on the name of his son, Yeshua HaMashiach, and love one another as he gave us commandments. And he that keepeth his commandments dwelleth in him, and he in him. Hereby we know that he abideth in us by the Spirit which he hath given us. And these are the words from the so-called apostle John the Beloved, who himself had to learn how to love enemies, because this brother was not always so loving. He was the one that asked Yeshua to bring down fire and burn up people that wasn't listening to them. That's this same John. Now, the one thing about it was, we grow in grace, in understanding love, as we stay closer to Torah. The complexity of loving relationships with difficult people that have been spiteful and hateful towards us. This is a journey. This is a marathon. This is not a sprint of growth. This is a growth that goes through some endurance. In fact, as you look at the life of John, who constantly was called the apostle of love, we remembered he wanted to call fire down on a group of people that didn't receive them when they were passing through that town. And Yeshua had to correct him. He said, you don't know what spirit you are of. Okay, well, later in life, we see that this man, according to a traditional story, recorded in the annals of history, though not recorded in scriptures, but I think there's some merit to it. As you know, John was the last living apostle, the one that John wrote Revelation. And he lived quite old. All the other apostles were killed. They were all martyred. He was the only one that was not martyred, who actually died a natural death. And he lived to be quite old. Contrary to popular opinion, actually, he ultimately came off the island of Patmos, where he had received the book of Revelation. He was quite old at that time. He was about close to 100 years old. The record of his last days, according to some of the historians of that time, of the late first century and early second century, like Polycarp, Papias, these were men who were actual disciples of John in his old age in the region of Ephesus in Asia Minor. This is why John wrote all those letters to the churches of Asia Minor, because that was where he was doing ministry before and after the island of Patmos experience. Well, there is a record by those disciples of his that say that John had reached such an old age that when they had Shabbat, they used to have to carry him on a cot to the Shabbat service. And they would give him an opportunity to speak. And this is a man that's, 100. And they said he only preached a small, short sermon. And it was the same sermon every Shabbat. And the same sermon was, little children, love one another. Little children love one another. And the record indicates that they asked him, say, Elder, why do you just preach that sermon only? Just that one only. He said, because if you do it, you fulfill what's necessary. That's what the record says. Now, that's a traditional record, historical, but I think it has some merit to what he said. Really, the emphasis on love in the heart of Israelites is at the very heart of the Torah. Also, for instance, in regards to the commandment in Exodus chapter 23, verse 4 through 5, the example of helping an enemy Israelite's livestock was not simply being kind to his animal. Now, it was good to show kindness to the animal, but there was more to this than, anti-cruelty society merits for pets and all, which is good, but there's else that goes along with that, because in Israelites, livestock was very important to that Israelite back in those days. And by helping your enemy's ox and the donkey, you were also helping your enemy's financial livelihood, because these creatures were part of his farming economic base in providing for the financial needs of himself and his family. So, I mean, if those animals were his tractors, you see what I'm saying? And we were in a agrarian society. If our tractor went down, our means of production for sustaining and maintaining our family went down. So in helping his donkey or his ox, it was good to help it for the sake of the animal, but it was good for him, the one who claimed they hated you, because now you're showing him that you care, that he has the means to take care of his financial needs for himself and his family. That's a good witness, to not let that animal stay stuck under a burden that would ultimately injure it, or could even possibly lead up to the animal having to be put to sleep. So too in this Exodus 23 passage, Torah is teaching us to not hurt other Israelites' livelihood who are our enemies. Now, this would mean, for instance, in today's world, that this principle would carry over into the work environment of employment, where Israelites stab each other in the back constantly to earn favor with their Gentile benefactors and bosses and employers. Israelites, all of us know what it's like to work in a financial environment with Israelites, and how quick Israelites stab each other in the back and try to earn favor with their employers by snitching and playing office politics against each other to in actuality, even cause problems for the possibility that their fellow Israelite, who's their enemy, they might want to get him fired or her fired. Yeah, we got devious people like that among us. Now, have you ever been in a situation like that where you knew these are your people and you knew what they were doing to you on that job? Now, you got bills to pay and you got, car notes and all of that. All right, mortgages and so now if somebody's trying to get in the way of you meeting those needs, you got in your heart what you believe is an enemy. And very often, there is something, if you keep praying, this is what I find. If you keep praying about that person, I recommend we don't pray, Father, get that person fired, because he's trying to get me fired. Now, we're talking about between other Israelites now. Of course, I would pray, Father, protect me from that person, or I'm not asking you to hurt this person, but just get them out of the way from hurting me. I do pray that. And after a period of time, because having been a Hebrew Israelite chaplain in the state of Illinois prison system, there were always employees, Black employees, that didn't like me because I wasn't teaching the inmates Christianity. And they were all into Christianity. So they would go and run to the warden and saying that I was a fake chaplain, that I was, they were so misinformed, they assumed Hebrew Israelites were another branch of the Muslim. And this was around the time of 9/11 when the Twin Towers went down. They were saying that I was teaching jihadism. Okay, now they were telling this to wardens, supervisors about me, and they were building up a lot of hatred from the white people at work against me, saying, we gotta get rid of him. Okay, well, the day came that that person who was doing ringleader that, I was in a position where I saw them do something where I could have gone to the ward and got them fired that day. I could have got them fired that day. Oh, I was thinking about it. But then again, the way this Torah teaching is giving it to us, it's saying we're not to do to our Israelites the way that maybe they were trying to do to us, because the Almighty protects us. So yeah, it would have been tempting to go ahead and, bring that person down. Then that person got to go look for a job, and that person got a family. But I said no. And when the time came, where the investigation came, where they were calling on me in the investigation about that person, I gave bare minimum. I didn't lie, but I just said enough to be honestly legal. But at the same time, I knew things even before that incident that I could have brought up and added more to it that even the investigators didn't know about. But I didn't do that. I only addressed what they were asking me at that time. So that person began to understand me, that I wasn't their enemy, even though they treated me like that. And I guess sometimes we have to take the high road of dealing with our people, not to return evil for evil with them. Now, whether this changes them or not, I don't, we don't know, but at least we know the Almighty sees this. And it wasn't too much longer that that person moved on to another job and kept going. They didn't lose anything, and they got out. The Almighty took them out of my way. So This passage in Exodus 23 about helping an enemy's ox or their donkey is basically the same like inner office politics that 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 we have between our own people, that we shouldn't repay evil for evil to them. And that to show that we love them is not so much by thinking it, but it's by demonstrating it, by an action that gives a witness to them that you're different. You're not like them, and you're not vindictively coming at them like they would do you. And maybe they might learn something from that. There's other ways Israelites can witness to people other than just shouting through a loudspeaker to our people. Sometimes our behavior is the loudspeaker, that behavior of love and concern and care for them, even when they've stabbed us in the back in these job situations. So Exodus 23 is telling Torah observing Israelites not to reciprocate to their Israelite enemies by not helping them when they are in trouble on the job and could possibly lose their job. Israelites are very vindictive to their Israelite enemies. You all know what I mean when I say vindictive. That means I told you so kind of attitude. But we are not to be callous in helping people lose their jobs if we're in a position to help them, because it's their livelihood for them and their family. Just like the ox and the donkey in Exodus 23 were important for ancient Israelites' financial livelihoods. Therefore, again, it states this principle in Exodus 23, verse 4 through 5, that is an example of loving your Israelite enemies by helping them out of an emergency. Now, later, Yeshua taught the principle of how to love non-Israelites who come from a group of people that are your enemies. And this is one of the things that's interesting. We can look at a group of people that hate us, that are non-Israelites, and say, those people, But isn't it interesting that in all groups of people, there's some good people and there's some bad people. All right. So if I say, okay, well, I hate that group because of what they did, what they've done to me and mine, okay. Yet, isn't it interesting? We must all honestly admit this. We have found some good people among white folk. I have. I don't think I'm the only one that has found some good white folk. Now, they come from a people that enslaved us. They come from a people that really persecuted us. So yeah, I mean, I can do as some brothers do and just lump all the group of them in the same category. Yet there may be one good. There may be some good ones there. And in Luke 10, there's the account of Yeshua teaching about how to deal with that. How to love a non-Israelite person whose people have been the enemies of your people. All right. And this is the one we really have to look at, because you and I can look at who the bad Israelites are. I mean, who the bad Gentiles are in how they deal with Israelites. Okay, yet, unless we see their actions, every day we live and work among them, we do business among them. So even though as a collective, their group has been pretty oppressive to us, nonetheless, not every one of them we meet do we actually see an action done by them of oppression to us? All right, so this is a question, even back in the time of Yeshua, where Israelites were asking this question. They wanted to know what is the right way of love towards non-Israelites. And this is a case in Luke chapter 10, verse 25, which says, "And behold, a certain Torah teacher or a lawyer stood up and tempted him, saying, Master, what shall I do to inherit eternal life? And he said unto him, What is written in the law? How readest thou? And he answering said, Thou shalt love Yah, the Elohim, with all thy heart, with all thy soul, with all thy strength, and with all thy mind, and thy neighbor as thyself. And he said unto him, Thou hast answered right. This do, and thou shalt live. But he, that is the Torah teacher, the Hebrew Torah teacher, willing to justify himself, said unto Yeshua, Who is my neighbor? Now, this brother, this Hebrew Torah teacher, is laying it on the line. Now, you telling me to love my neighbor. Okay, what kind of neighbor are you talking about? Are you only talking about a neighbor that's my own people only? All right. Are you talking about a neighbor that's from a foreign country? So this issue is still a topic among Israelites today, and it was back then. So now, Yeshua, who are you telling me that I'm to love as my neighbor, as I love as myself? Am I only to love Israelites as my neighbor only? Or does this apply to certain Gentiles? Well, as you know, Yeshua, the master teacher, had something to say about that. See, this Hebrew Torah teacher was questioning Yeshua the same way many Hebrews do today, regarding whether we should only count Israelites as neighbors in our understanding whom to love as ourselves, but not foreigners. So he asked Yeshua regarding whom he would count as a neighbor to love. Now he's asking Yeshua basically a question, who do you say we should love? Who should we love a foreigner? All right. Well, because to this Torah teacher, it was obvious he only felt the law of love your neighbor laws was only applicable between Israelites and not foreigners, and certainly not applicable to people of foreign enemy nation to Israelites. I mean, you can read between the lines. That's where this brother's thinking when he's asking Yeshua this question. And he wants Yeshua to break it down to him. And he's trying to tempt Yeshua to say something in error. Either if Yeshua says too much to love the Gentiles, then the word will get out. This man's weak. He's teaching people to love those people that did this and that to us. Then if he comes out, no, only love Israelites, don't, and hate the Gentiles with perfect hatred. Then if Yeshua did that, that would then mean that the government would have to look at him, because he would then be an enemy of the state to the Romans that had occupied the land. So this is quite a challenge. I've seen some of my brothers like Bishop Nathaniel and others. They always want to make the point, and this is the same argument right here. Well, you know, the Gentiles here are only those of Israelites living out in Gentile areas. So, I mean, this is, and then if you say, well, maybe, you know, the love goes beyond just that. Oh, you weak. You let your guard down. You weak. This is the challenge that Yeshua had to address by this guy's question to him. So let's look at how Yeshua addressed this. Now, Yeshua responds to this question with this account in Luke chapter 10, verse 32, 37, regarding what we now call the story of the Good Samaritan. All right, now this was a people that Israelites back in the time of Yeshua really hated these people. These people were some of the biggest stab in the back people to Israelites, taking sides with the prevailing Gentile governments against Israelites. They had always been doing that. So if there were any people that were so hated from the Israelites, the Samaritans definitely were high up on that category. Now, the Samaritans of that time, I believe the Israelites hated them more even than the Edomites. They hated them more than the Edomites in that time. So the Samaritans of that time were primarily a Gentile group of people that had converted to some Israelite Torah teaching. And a few of them had some Israelite genetic admixture, just like is the case of modern Jewish people today, where 3 to 5% of them have the paternal E1B1A paternal haplogroup that we, the Hebrew Israelites, have. 3 to 5% of the main 8 groups of Jewish people in their midst, whether Ashkenazi, Sephardic, Mizrahi, Iranian Jews, or Moroccan Jews, of them, out of the midst of all of those groups, it has been discovered they have 3 to 5% of your blood, ancient Israelite blood, E1B1A. So what that means is then modern Jews today, Jewish people, would then mean, it would mean then that anywhere from 95 to 97% of them have no ancient Israelite DNA in them whatsoever. But between 3 and 5% of them do. And this was the kind of makeup of the Samaritans at that time, in the time. And we get this 3 to 5% of modern Jews from a research paper by 2 world-class geneticists. One is Dr. Marjani of University of California, Berkeley, and Dr. Reich of Harvard. And they discovered this in their genetic research of Jewish groups in their paper called, quote, The History of African Gene Flow into Southern European, Levantines, and Jews. So this is an interesting paper for your reference on this data about the 3 to 5% of Jewish people having DNA that you and I have from their paternal ancestors. And it's interesting, the paper shows that they got that admixture back in biblical era times of the First Temple period, which means that our ancestors, when they were scattered by the Assyrians and the Babylonians, they traveled among different groups of people in exile. And had children by some of those people. And so that 3 to 5% of Jewish people, they can only track that the admixture came to them 2,700 years ago. That's quite interesting, 70 generations ago. So the Samaritans were just like that. They had this small admixture of actual Hebrew Israelite, but they were vast majority, nothing more than converts. They would, well, they were converted Gentiles to Torah-based teaching. So if there was ever a group of people, when this brother's asking, should I love, who is my neighbor? And he's implying, I'm only to love Israelites and not love the other people. Yahshua couldn't have picked a worse group of people to talk to another Israelite man to love than the Samaritan. Now this is interesting. All right, just like today, we look at Israelis, Israelites look at Jewish people, all right? And we know definitely they are an enemy to us. We know definitely they lie on us, they snitch on us to the government with Project Megiddo. They do all of that against us. Basically, what Yeshua is telling this brother, I want to tell you about those people. The Samaritans were the Jewish people of that time, the converts of that time. The converts that we see today of Jewish people, that's a much later conversion group of people, much later. In medieval times, they converted mostly. But he's talking about in first century, these Samaritans, they would be looked upon the way Hebrews look at Jewish people today. Now, I must give Yeshua credit. And that takes a lot of nerve for him to bring this up in explaining in answer to this brother's question. Don't you just love Yeshua, how bold he is and how unabashed he is to speak truth, regardless of where it hits or where it falls. And he didn't care whether he was popular or not popular, whether he was liked or not liked. He didn't care. Truth is true. And so he uses a Samaritan to illustrate something about our enemies, foreign nation, and enemy persons' love. Now, the Samaritans of that time were just like the Jewish people are to us now. They're primarily converts, a little bit of some of your blood, just a little bit. All right. And I can tell you who some of them are that they have discovered had a little bit of you in them. Albert Einstein. You ever wonder why Albert Einstein had kind of like a afro? Albert Einstein had a little bit of you. I've seen the names of some of the Jewish people. I've seen who they are. Napoleon had a little bit of you. I could go on, but anyway. There was another person that had a little bit of us in him, and he wasn't Jewish, but you'd be surprised. Lyndon Baines Johnson. I think J. Rogers wrote a lot of books about some of these U.S. presidents, having some of us in them. That's a famous book for your frame of reference on that. Okay, so now, this is what Yeshua is going to tell this brother. Because we know at that time, the Samaritans and the Hebrews really hated each other. It's the same like between Zionist Jews and Hebrew Israelites now. It's the same thing, basically. So it's shown in John chapter 4, it reports Yeshua's encounter with a Samaritan woman. Then said the woman of Samaria unto him, how is it that thou being a Yahudi, being a Hebrew, hast drank of me, which am a woman of Samaria? For the Yahudim, that is the Hebrews, have no dealings with the Samaritans. All right. And Yeshua is addressing this woman. And his disciples come back, say, what is he doing talking to this woman? So in response to the Torah teacher's question as to whom the law of love your neighbor applied to, Yeshua gives this account of the good, so-called good Samaritan. It says in chapter 10, verse 30, picking up there, and Yeshua answered and said, a certain man went down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell among thieves, which stripped him of his raiment and wounded him and departed, leaving him half dead. And by chance, there came down a certain priest that way. And when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. And likewise a Levite, when he was at the place, came and looked on him and passed by on the other side. But a certain Samaritan, as he journeyed, came where he was, and when he saw him, he had compassion on him and went to him and bound up his wounds, pouring in oil and wine, and set him on his own beast, and brought him to an inn, and took care of him. And on the morrow, when he departed, he took out 2 pence and gave them to the host, and said unto him, take care of him. Whatsoever thou spendest more, when I come again, I will repay thee. Which now of these 3 thinkest thou was neighbor unto him that fell among the thieves? And he said, that is the Torah teacher Hebrew, he said, he that showed mercy on him. Then said Yeshua unto him, go and do thou likewise. So, in summation of this account, Yeshua asked that Israelite Torah teacher, verse 36, which now of these 3 thinkest thou was neighbor unto him that fell among the thieves? And in verse 37, this moray of the Torah said, it says, quote, and he said, he that showed mercy on him. Wouldn't you think that showing mercy to somebody is showing love? I don't think you can show mercy to somebody that you don't love or have a sense of love or concern or care about them. And I think sometimes, I think saints, we beat up on each other a lot about why we still have a lot of pent up anger and bitterness towards people that done us wrong. And then, particularly when it's from our own people or even family members. And then we read the scriptures about forgive those who despitefully misuse you. We read those and we hear what scriptures tell us to do. Even Leviticus 19 says, don't hold a grudge against your brother. That means you're holding unforgiveness against another Israelite. Okay, so we beat ourselves up and say, I gotta forgive, I gotta forgive, I gotta forgive. But think about that. Maybe we should just, while thinking about forgiving, maybe we need to just first start thinking about, do I love this person? Because see, you can't really forgive somebody if you don't really love that person. That's the other thing I've had to learn is I stay angry, I stay mad with people that may have despitefully misused me. And I can think of all the anger. I can think of all the bitterness. And I can just think of all the reasons I don't like that person. Maybe even hate that person. Though I won't admit it, but deep down inside there's got to be some of that. So one thing is I get my therapy through the Holy Spirit. See, I don't need to go to a psychologist. I go to the Holy Spirit the word psycha, suka, that means soul. And a man can't know what's in your soul. I mean, he can give you little pep talks, but he can't get down in there, but the Holy Spirit can get deep down in us. And what the Holy Spirit revealed to me is just a day or two ago. And I'm just going to paraphrase what I think he was saying to me. It was like this. You always talking about you want to learn to forgive other people. You're always talking about you don't want to hold grudges against your people. All right? Or against your family. Because I have a very volatile family relationship. I think some of us may know what that's like. I wish it was not that way, but it is. And it has been for years. Okay. Now, the fact is, I want to forgive them. I want to let that go, but it still ain't so. So the Ruach is bearing witness to my heart that, well, before you can really forgive them, you got to really begin to understand how much or how little you love them. Do you really love them? See, before we can get to the point of forgiveness, we got to start at that point. Do we love them? Do we really care about them? Or can we get vindictive and say, well, they're going to get theirs. They're going to get theirs. They did me wrong. They're going to get theirs. It's coming. It's coming. Yet, if you really love someone, you don't want to see them get sick. You don't want to see them get hurt. You don't want to see them die if you really love them. Now, you'll be angry with them, but you care enough about them that you don't want to see harm to them. That I find the Ruach is showing me, that's the beginning of the process of healing that leads up to forgiveness. And like I said, the way Yah puts things before us, always hides secrets like that in plain sight before us. You can't have forgiveness if you don't. You can't forgive people if you don't have love for people. It just comes down to that. Now, I'm just getting back to this lesson. I'm wrapping this up. And thank you for bearing up with me. But Yeshua is teaching this Torah teacher about this Samaritan, that though he is from a foreign enemy, but because this man, this Samaritan, helped an Israelite, he was now counted as being a neighbor to love as yourself. The way Yeshua is teaching is that this man, he's from a group that's hateful to Israelites. But you can tell by what this man did for an Israelite. This man doesn't hate Israelites, even though he's from a group of people that do hate Israelites. And so we can't always just have a blanket indictment for a whole group of people to be angry and hate. We just can't. And so in saying this, Yeshua is teaching there will be people who will come out of other nations that hate Israelites. But there will come out of some of those people those who will cleave and help Israelites. As such, we love them as we love ourselves. As Torah says in Leviticus 19, verse 33 through 34. And if a stranger sojourn with you in your land, you shall not vex him. But the stranger that dwelleth with you, that is a foreigner, a person of another nation, but the stranger that dwelleth with you shall be unto you as one born among you. and thou shalt love him as thyself. For you were strangers in the land of Egypt. I am Yah, your Elohim. Hallelujah.